Okay, so in this class we're going to look at forms. So we've seen how to do various things in HTML, lists, tables. Forms are another thing you need to be able to code in HTML because forms are a big part of people's online experience. So if you look at this form here, we have different kinds of form elements. Here we have radio buttons. Here we have a drop-down list. Here we have checkboxes. And if I was connected up to the network, when I clicked submit here, it would take information from the form and then send it off to a server somewhere. So I'll give you the URL for a web page that will take the stuff from your form and show it and give it back to you again, just so you can see that everything is working okay. So some parts of things that happen online happen in the browser. So we saw, for example, that you specify the HTML and you specify the CSS, and that explains to the browser how the page is going to look. Obviously, if say you're buying something online, eventually you're going to send your information to a server somewhere and it's going to connect up to a bank and whatever. So some of these things happen at the server side. So depending on which program you're in, by the time you're done, you'll have started at the start and you've worked all your way back to the server side, and that server might be connected to a database, and so you'll have the full picture. So if you're in DWeb, by the time you're done with this course, I don't mean this module, I mean this whole course, you'll have a full understanding of all of the different pieces. But for now, all we're interested in is that we send off the stuff in the form off to a server somewhere and it does something with it. The server you're going to send your form data to is just going to spit back at you what you sent it. And if you didn't get back everything you thought you sent, then something is wrong somewhere. So today we're going to look at the HTML you need for forms. Now, there's a lot in this set of slides, and you can see from the style of it, it's not my own. So the writing might be a bit smaller than usual, or smaller than I prefer. If we don't get through all this today, I would propose that you get the PDF and go through it. And also, you can go online and Google stuff about forms. So what I want to do today is to just give you the main points that you need to remember. So don't stress out now about taking down, what kind of thing is that called and what's that called and what's that called, I mean, a lot of this stuff nobody keeps in their head, like. Do you know what I mean? If you're doing forms every day of the week, you might keep them all in your head, but you don't have to keep everything in your head. That's not the nature of knowledge in 2013. There was a time when being able to list all the state capitals in the US or something meant you were a brainy person. But I mean, that's not valuable anymore. So what's valuable is how you fit all this stuff together. So I want to make sure today that you understand the techniques and the things you need to watch out for making all this stuff work. Okay? So in the web page, you have a form element, and that wraps up your whole form. So it's a form tag, and with all other tags, it has a begin and an end. So we have form to begin the form, and then /form to end the form. So if you look at this example here, with this tiny writing, you can see there that we have labels and we have inputs. So if you look at this label here that says first name, that's what's going to appear on the web page. Now that could actually be anything. It's just a prompt to tell the user what they should put in. It doesn't actually it generally doesn't get sent to the server. what's important here is the input, and this creates this box here. So if we had this HTML here, we'd get something that looks a bit like this. And we'll see in the course of today's class, there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. You can have very complex forms if you need. There's a type, for example, that's called password. So there's a type of input. And if it's a password, the password doesn't appear on the screen. So you've often seen that on a website where you type in your password and it doesn't appear. So it means that someone actually seeing your screen can't see what you're typing. So that's an example. So we see that in the actual layout, things might look the same. You know, these just look like blank boxes, but if they're different types, they might have different behaviors. And the newest version of HTML5 actually gives you a great many options for the different types you can use. And it even will check that those things look the way they should look. Okay? So, in the new version of HTML, you can say things like, this here is an email address. And if you put in something other than an email address, the HTML and the CSS interacting together could have a tizzy fit on your behalf and make the background color change. Up until HTML5, you would have needed to write some fairly complicated JavaScript to make that happen. But with the new version of HTML, you can actually specify quite sophisticated types. Another interesting thing you'll see is that if you say something is a phone number, then obviously it would just expect digits. And if you put in something other than digits, you can make it give out. But what's really cool is if you're on, say, an iPhone and you click on that field, right? The keypad it gives you will only have numbers in it. So the browser can actually, and the operating system working together, can actually do some fairly clever stuff. Okay, but we'll see a bit more about that in a while, okay? That's an important point. You can force some attributes to be required. So you can say you have to put this in. And then if the person leaves it blank, you can make it look different, for example. Or it might look different by default even. But the browser, so if you specify your form very well, the browser can have certain behaviors based on what it's expecting. So that can save you a lot of work, stuff that would have had to be done in JavaScript before. Now, every form has a name attribute. If you don't put in the name, the form will still look grand. But it'll be feck all used to you because you won't be able to send the data off to the server. Remember now, the whole point of this is that you collect data from the user and send it off somewhere for processing. It's not enough that it looks pretty. It has to actually work. So if the person is ordering a pizza, you know, you need to send off the size and the toppings that they want. If a person is filling out a form to pay for something, you obviously need to send, you know, their name and address. So the form has to do, so the form has a job to do other than to look good in the browser. No two elements on the form could have the same name. Basically, the name of the element and its value is going to be sent off to the server. If two things have the same name, then only the second one will get sent off, or the last one will get sent off. Now, there is an exception to that, but you'll see why we need it to be that way. So you typically send off your data to a server somewhere, and that server, for example, may be running a PHP program. Now, that shouldn't mean anything to you at this stage. If it does, yip-de-doo. If it doesn't, no big deal. But that's something that's happening at the server side. So in the forms we're going to use, we're going to send off all of the data to this program here, which is a machine somewhere in the C corridor. I think all it does is this. We just have it there for the crack. And you send off your information, and it'll send back to you exactly what you told it. If you send off, for example, the pizza that the person wants, and all you get back is, large, and no mention of the toppings, then something has gone wrong. If you send off the person's name and address, and all that comes back is the name, something has gone wrong. But all this does is tell you what you told it, which isn't often the same as what you think you told it. Okay, so we can have text areas. That's a useful one, and you can even specify then how big that is and stuff. Okay, so the label here is largely immaterial. If you left out the label, the program, so to speak, would still work the same, but obviously the person wouldn't know what they're supposed to type in, so it wouldn't be a lot of use. But it wouldn't have much of an impact on the running of the code at the other end. Now, you can also give your elements an ID. But the reason you would give the elements of a form IDs is so that the CSS can interact with them, so that you can interact with them using JavaScript and maybe CSS. But it's important not to confuse the ID and the name. When you're sending off data in a form, it's the name that counts for sending off the data. The ID may be useful for making it look pretty, for changing how it looks, for doing stuff in the CSS. So the CSS may need the ID, but you still need the name if you want the form to work. Okay? You can have some default text if you want inside in the text area, and the person can overwrite that. That can be useful and give the person a tip as to what you're trying to get them to do. Okay. You can specify, how many columns, how many rows. Now, one of the things I don't like about the way forms work is that here, I think, for example, we're starting to venture into the way it looks, and using HTML to specify how it looks, when really that should be the job of the style sheet. But in some circumstances, it's just not that's not reconcilable. It would be nice, really, if there was a whole sort of set of CSS properties that you could apply to form elements. But really, we're not really there yet. Okay. Some browsers even have a little thing you can pull down there where you can make the thing bigger if you want. You'll notice as well that from browser to browser, you'll see much more differences in forms than you would in other elements and other things you might do. And also older browsers, especially if they don't fully support HTML5, you'll see a very big difference. And even now, not all browsers support HTML5 fully when it comes to the forms. You can specify the maximum length. That can be useful. Have you done any sort of interface stuff? Do you know what focus is? Do you know when you go to a form and one of the things is, when you're like only one thing on the form is selected at any one time? So if you were to go to a page and without clicking on anything, just start typing, your text might go into that particular thing that has the focus. If you click somewhere else, the focus will go somewhere else. So that's what focus means. You can specify one of the elements in the form to have the focus by default. Of course, if you specify more than one, well, then all bets are off. Now, so you can create a button then that when you click on it is going to send the stuff on the form off to the server. And so once again, I've listed this URL here. So this is the address of the server as far as you're concerned. Okay, so that's the submit button. You can also have a reset button which will just clear everything in the form, and if the autofocus was set to something, that'll be there again. Now, so there are some new types in HTML5. Of course, if you've never seen the old ones, new doesn't really mean much to you, but it's important to realize that they're new and that they might not be supported in every browser, even in every new up-to-date browser. So even if you have all your browsers up to date, you might see some differences. And of course, there are millions of people out there who don't even know they have a browser, let alone that it might need updating. All they know is they have the interweb, like. So you have to bear that in mind as well. I generally don't encourage students to freak out about all the possible combinations of ye olde browsers out there, because it's just too much to take on. In reality, though, in your working environment, you might need to consider, feature by feature, okay, kind of what percentage of people actually have this. And if your whole page depends on it, and your statistics tell you that only 20% of people are running browsers that actually could do it, well, then you need to think of it. But for this module, you don't need to worry about things like that. But don't freak out if something doesn't work in the first browser you try. Try it in Chrome and in Firefox and maybe Safari, and then if it works in one and not the other two, maybe you've done something wrong, or maybe those other browsers just don't support that. So you can specify that something is an email address, and we'll see, not today, but we'll see another day, how if someone puts something in that isn't an email address, well, then you might give out to them. Or you might not send the form off even. And we'll see how you could do that. But what's interesting is that if a person clicks on that on, say, an iPhone, they will only get characters that would be available in a valid email address appear on their little keyboard. If you say something is a date, so if you ask someone to specify a date, they could put in, the 23rd of the 10th, 2013. But if the browser supports it, it'll actually pop up a calendar, and they can click through and select the date. Now, before HTML5, that was a shed load of programming that you had to do to make this calendar window pop up and go through all the days or the months, whatever. And so now this is built into the browser on a good day. You can specify, it can be a URL. Color is a mad one. You can actually say this is a color, and remember I was telling you in some applications you can get, like, the operating system will have a built-in facility for you to select things by RGB or CMYK or whatever. You might see that in PowerPoint. If the browser and the operating system together support that, you can actually say, well, pick a color, and up this will actually pop, and the person will have to pick a color. I have yet to see a practical application for that. I mean, you could say, you could maybe, if you're getting a t-shirt printed or something, maybe you could specify the color that you wanted the t-shirt or something like that. You don't see, some of these things are so new you don't see them very often on the web. And certainly I have yet to see the color one used, you can specify it's a file type. Okay, so now these slides may be a bit old, but generally what happens is if the browser doesn't support this new type, then you just get a text field to type things into. So in Chrome you get something like this. Okay. So for the date of birth here, this will pop up in Chrome, but not in this particular version of Firefox whenever these slides were made. I think these were made last year. And in this case, the color one would be just, it's just expecting a text field, whatever. Okay? But when you click on a color, this thing actually pops up. Which is actually, it's just quite impressive, but you're probably not aware of what it was like before, but this was a lot of work. If you wanted someone to specify a date and have a calendar pop up, I mean, that was like, entire assignments were based on, just doing that in later years. And now it's built into the browser. Okay, so now back to some of the kind of regular, mundane, unexciting stuff, okay? You can have a data list, and this allows you to have, a bunch of different options. And you get an autocomplete there. So you could do this, say, for counties in Ireland. Someone is putting in an address. You could specify, well, obviously we know there are 26 counties, depending on how you want to count them. And so if someone put in C, they might see what Cork and Clare and Carlow appear. And pick the ones they want. Carlow County. I'm sure it is, yeah. No. This is a cool one as well, which isn't supported in many browsers really. It's a slider. So instead of picking, say you want a value from 0 to 100, instead of asking the person to type in, 57, they can move the slider up and down and, stop at the point they want. And it would maybe show the value as well as they slide up and down. That can be useful if you, think of an example there, Colin. I made a little game with RGB values. Remember I showed you that? That used these sliders. And some of you would have found that if you opened it up in a different browser, it actually didn't work so good. So that used sliders there. Now, radio buttons. So, like so many things in interfaces and in computing, they have old origins. Okay, these are called radio buttons because on old radios you had buttons that would have stations pre-selected. So I guess you had 5 buttons, you had 5 stations, which I guess was, it's possible that there was so few. And if you push down button 2, well, if you had button 2 pushed down and you were listening to, Radio Éireann, as my grandmother used to say, and then if you push down another button, the button you had pushed down would pop up. No, I never had a radio like that, but it does remind me of how, cassette players used to work. You push down one button, push down another button, it does pop up. So the point with the radio button is that only one of them can be selected. Now, in the language we have of interfaces, when you see little dots like that you can, select one, that means only one is selectable. Somehow, and I guess you've been online long enough now and using computers long enough, when we see these circles, we're supposed to know that you can only select one. I mean, I think if my mother was to go online and see something, they're just circles. I mean, they don't mean anything. And you'll see in a minute when we have checkboxes, they're little squares. You can have multiple ones of those. So, selecting your age group, for example, although I see there that 34 is duplicated, which is probably, putting a hole in my argument there. No, if you're 34, you could select 2, I guess. But imagine, say you're ordering a pizza. You can have small, medium, or large. And let's say you're only ordering one pizza. Like, it's small, or it's medium, or it's large. Like, it can't be small and medium at the same time. Whereas, if you're selecting, pineapple and peppers and chicken, well, you can have pineapple and you can have peppers at the same time and you can have chicken. or you can just have chicken and peppers. You know, these things, you can have multiple. You can have any number of them. So we use checkboxes for those. So I don't know if that's totally obvious to you, or are you now realizing there was some method to the things you've been seeing, you know, your whole adult lives? I don't know. I mean, did you know this already? That this was what was going on visually? Anyway, it's important to do this right then, because if you do it wrong, you can allow people to select multiple radios buttons, okay? So here, for example, the person was able to select 18 to 24 and 34 to 49 and 50 to 64. Looking at the code there, can anybody see what's missing from there, or what might be making it work properly? Well, it's the name. And this is that one exception where I said you can only use the name once on each form. This is the exception there where you do use the name over and over again. And then if you group these things properly, only one will be selectable. And it's okay to use name here over and over again, because only one is going to get sent off anyway, which is kind of the whole point. In this case, you only want one. So that's how we do radio buttons. Whereas for checkboxes then, and these are the little squares, you can select multiple ones of these. And in this case then, we make sure that we provide value attributes for each of the checkboxes, and it's the value that will get sent. So depending on the kind of element you have in your form, different things will happen. So you might just be told that the thing is actually selected, or you might get the value sent, or sometimes the value is just something that's used on the form for appearances. It can vary a bit, okay? And the point with checkboxes is that you can select any or all of them. No. So when you click on this then, this actually is what ends up getting sent to the PHP server. And it then will process that. You can actually, usually you can even see all the data going. It's wrapped up in the URL, which is a security issue, in fact. You can have drop-down lists. I know earlier I said for counties we were using something else. With a drop-down list, you can just, click and then all the things pop down and you select from your option. So sometimes that's appropriate. Obviously, there's a limited number of counties in Ireland, so that's practical. But for someone's actual address, that would be free form text. For the kind of credit card they have, there might only be 4 or 5 types. So depending on the kind of data you're looking for, a different, different form element would be appropriate. Sometimes people say, please select from one of these. But then the problem is, please select can actually be an option that gets sent off. So if you were to do that, you'd need to provide some code that would make sure they weren't actually sending off to the server, please select a county as their actual county. So that's something you'd want to avoid. You can even group them if you really want to have a sophisticated drop-down box. So here we have Munster counties in one section and Connacht counties in another, if you really wanted to push the boat out. If you provide their multiple as an attribute, then they can select many things from the list. And they do that then by holding down the option key, blah, blah, blah. But I think 99% of the population doesn't know about that. I think if you present, 100 people with something like that, they will understand that they can only select one. I don't think people know how to actually select multiple options. You probably don't, and you're computing students. But you hold down a key and then you select, and then you scroll down and select another one, select another one. So as an interface element, that's, I think, not very widely used and therefore not terribly useful. You can break up your form into sections using field set. And then the browser will have an attempt, will have a stab at fencing them off. And you can even then provide little sections there for them in the legend. You can also, inside in the CSS, start fiddling with all these things and change the colors and stuff and whatever. But that's a conversation for another day. We're not interested now, and we're only interested in specifying the HTML here. So depending on the input element that you're using, the value may have a different effect, may have a different use. So if you have a button, for example, the value on that button, the value attribute, just says what the text on the button says. So it's just going to affect the appearance of the thing on the form. Okay, with text and say password, the value is just going to define the initial default. So again, that's just something for the appearance of the page. Although obviously if the person does nothing, it will become the data. But then for other elements, the value attribute is what actually gets sent to the server. So in the form, we have to include code like this up on the top. So there are two methods for sending data to the PHP server. And it's not really a big deal for you guys because you're only going to use one anyway, so don't worry about it. But post is more secure. But we're interested in get. We're going to use that because it's not simpler for us. It just made the code at the other end actually simpler. Okay. So you specify the method, and then in action you provide a URL. And like I said, the URL that we're going to use is atlantis.cit.ie/displayvalues.php. So if you put these attributes in your form tag, and then you have a submit button, when you click submit, the browser will hoover up all the information from the input elements on the form and then send them off to the PHP server. And so if you were ordering a pizza, that might result in a pizza arriving at your house, in the next 30 minutes or something. This code here is just going to cause all the things you sent off to come back. Now, if you had a form for ordering a pizza, for example, and you sent off, you wanted medium with chicken, peppers, and onion, and this server sent back to you medium, but didn't tell you anything else, then you haven't sent it the toppings. Alternatively, if you send off, medium, and what did I say, chicken, peppers, and onions, and it just comes back with onions, then something is wrong also. So make sure when this code, when this server sends you back the information you sent it, that everything that should be there is there. Now, if you have, say, a checkbox and it's not checked, then it won't come back with that's not checked. It just won't come back. But if you check it, it'll come back to telling you that it's checked. Okay? So the value of a submit button is just the actual text in the button. So it might be order now, or it might be send, whatever. It's up to you. That can even be an image if you want. No, I don't know, is that a good idea? I mean, it would depend on the layout of your page and how the page looked. And you would need to make sure that the clickable, onable button looks like a button. I mean, we've been brainwashed at this stage to know that if something has, rounded corners like that, and it's grey, and it's got this kind of bevel, or maybe a particular kind of drop shadow, that's something that's clickable, onable. I mean, if you just have a shiny, happy picture of a person, who's to know if you click on that's actually the button? Like, we don't realize it because we, through years of practice, have learned the language of what web pages look like and what certain elements mean. And it's only when we forget those conventions do we realize they were there all along. So if your buttons look cool but they don't look like buttons, you have a problem. Now, what's a button look like? Well, that's an interesting question, and that's something that changes and evolves. But there's no point in your page looking cool and being unusable. And there's always a challenge there. You want to move things forward a bit, make things look nice, make things look interesting, while at the same time taking people with you. So if you have a super new cool design for a button, you better make sure everybody knows about it before you start using it. So this is actually in many respects, it's a good example in that, what does a camel mean? Obviously this person just picked an image at random when they're making the slides, but there you go. What does camel mean? You need to make sure it's clear what's going on. So any questions on any of that? What time is it there? Do I have time to connect up to the network and see if I can actually show you that working? I do. So here I'm going to say, this is the best part. Watch. Okay, so we select mail. Let's say I know I'm ordering a pizza or something. I have a bike and I have an airplane. Okay, we say submit. We send that off, and then the PHP server the browser has hoovered up everything I selected, sent it off to the PHP server, and the PHP server is sending us back exactly what it is we sent. Now, in reality, the PHP server would send back something like, thank you for your order number is whatever, blah, 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 blah. Your expected shipping date is whatever, or, thanks very much, your pizza will be there in 30 minutes, whatever. We've set this up to send you exactly what you've sent it. And sure enough, it has sent back everything I sent it. If we don't select any of these, interestingly, and this sometimes worries people, it doesn't say you haven't selected bike, it just says nothing about it. Okay. And you'll see also that it hasn't sent small, medium, and large. It has sent the values that are specified in the HTML. Can anybody think of a reason why it's set up that way? What the value of such a system is? Anybody think why it's a good idea to specify in the code rather than just say, well, look, if the person selects medium there, we'll send medium and not med, as in the case of this here. Any takers? Anyone brave enough to hazard a guess? Well, one reason why it's useful is that, let's suppose we were going to have this page in English and French and in Spanish. So, you know, we'd have large, grande, or grande appearing on the form. However, when the information gets sent to the server, I mean, you know, the server doesn't care whether it's, you know, a large pizza, a grande pizza, or a grande pizza. Do you know what I mean? It wants it to be large. So, irrespective of how the form looks, you could ensure that the same data always gets sent to the server, for example. So this example here is available on a link from the blog. So you can see that we've said form name equals input, action we specify the URL, and method is get. And there's our input boxes here. You can see for the options here, we're sending SML, MED, LRG, or XLG. We're not sending small, medium, or large. That's not what the server receives. And similarly here, if you send this one, you'll get back with bike. There's something I have a doubt about, which I'm going to have to check. I noticed on the slides there, it's sent. In the slides there, it used the same name for a bunch of checkboxes. While that makes sense for radio buttons, I have a doubt. I think that may be incorrect. I think if you use the same name for a bunch of checkboxes, only one of them will get sent. So if I'm correct, the slides are incorrect. So I'll check that out and make sure I get back to you. If I don't get back to you, be sure to ask. So if you look at this example here, each of the checkboxes has a different name. And also, I mean, there's a value associated with each one. But I have a suspicion if I called all of these vehicle and I selected bike, car, and airplane, I wouldn't get bike, car, and airplane back. I'd only get airplane, perhaps. So if that's the case, there's a mistake in the slides. If that's the case, obviously I'll correct the slides, but you need to make sure you'd have the newer version. So any questions on any of that? So this week in the labs, I want you to go messing with forms, and just to get those working. An important part of getting the forms working is not just having them look good, not just specifying the HTML so they appear properly on the page, but also making sure that when you click submit, excuse me, all of the data that you're required to send gets sent to the PHP server. And you can check that it has, because with this PHP program, it sends you back everything you told it. So you can check. Any questions? Great stuff, guys. Thanks.